So hi there. Welcome to the Soyle Studios podcast. I'm your host. I'm not. I'm not a host. I'm Jack
Definitely
Gleeson.
not a host. I'm Tom L. Shipp, and this podcast is not just about Soyle Studio, but about us and our
Yeah,
ideas.
yeah. If you know the 11 people who were subscribed to the channel beforehand are actually watching or listening, as the case may be, you may remember that we had some podcasts before. Those are unlisted. What we may end up doing is going back and re-recording some of them, trimming some of them down, improving the audio quality, that sort of thing. Hopefully to be something around what I'm hoping is good audio quality like this one. What we're planning to do with this podcast is essentially use it as a tool to talk about our upcoming projects, kind of their status, their to-dos, what our ideas behind them are, what some of the goals driving them are, that sort of thing.
Yeah, so the type of projects we're currently engaged in is there's Soyle Studio, which is a creative suite of programs for assisting in all aspects of the creative process. Sorry,
It's pronounced creative suite.
what did I say?
Suit.
Did I say suit?
You did.
In my mind, I was like, don't say suit. And I think because I was thinking, don't say suit, I said suit.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, creative suite, because it's freaking sweet, of programs for assisting in all aspects of the creative process. Right. So another project that we'd like to do in the future is some video games. And the people we bring onto this podcast will be mainly creatives, different writers, maybe artists, people who work in the creative field, and try to see what they do and what tools they think would help them to accomplish their goals. That includes video game designers. So you got writers, video game designers, different kinds of formats of writing, like graphic novels and
Yeah. Well, I mean, we say stories. That's really all encompassing. We have plans for essentially written things like short stories or books or whatever. But graphic novels, visual novels, which, it sounds like a visual novel would be the exact same fucking thing as a graphic novel, but apparently a visual novel is actually an interactive game essentially, where it's basically a graphic novel, but you click through and the text comes up, and it's I think you can do it either as a first person thing or
and they're usually anime themed.
Yeah, I don't know why. They don't have to be. It can be whatever. Yeah. So I don't know. We're going to be exploring a bunch of different avenues of storytelling. Hell, we might even make videos that get released here on this channel, or did I say video games or videos?
Videos.
Okay, yeah, that's what I meant to say. But we also, in the future, again, we might even work on full feature-length movies. Obviously that's that's a very future thing once we're really more well established. But that's definitely the plan.
We're definitely flexible in the different mediums that we like to create on.
Exactly. And Soyle Studio, kind of being the topic of this podcast. We mentioned that one of the projects we'll be working on is Soyle Studio, but that's essentially the at least the working title for a story writing program. But really, where our plans are for the programs we'll be releasing is we're calling it a creative suite, because it'll be not just this story writing program, but also things that you can think of as sort of a free version of the Adobe Creative Cloud platform.
Okay, in what sense?
In terms that that's a, huh?
And so, what would the different programs within the suite be?
Right. So you'd have something like for video editing, for audio editing, for music composition, something similar to like FL Studio or GarageBand or whatever on Mac.
Okay. A map generator. I know you had that before.
Yeah, I mean,
Cool.
well, that was for a very specific project.
Why not?
I mean, that kind of feeds into more of a game engine, and allowing the creative people working on the game to kind of create stuff for assets for the game that the developers don't actually have to program. It just kind of gets generated for them in the format they need. So that would be kind of part of an engine. But yeah, I mean, hell, even programs that actually help you create your own video game without having to know anything about programming or anything like that. You basically get to use all these different programs that work together in sync to essentially create any type of creative project you want. We're just starting with something for storytelling because that's kind of the root of all of these types of projects, is at least my belief.
Yeah, it's the most under... Like, there's not like a tool specifically for it in the way that we think about it.
Yeah, exactly. You have tons of stuff for like music editing and video editing, and you have game engines and all this different stuff. But yeah, you're right. There's not really a huge market, or at least there's not a huge set of options for a generic storytelling
Story builder.
Right. I mean, we'll get into a lot of like the things that are out there and kind of how this thing is going to differ from those a little bit later on. So let's go ahead and just kind of introduce ourselves so that people know why the hell why anything that we say is even remotely relevant. So Tom, why don't you start us off?
Well, I'm Tom L. Shipp.
The introductions at this point.
the L stands for luxury.
Of course it does.
So I'm somebody who likes to write. I like to think about ideas in terms of stories and design features, like in games and interactive media. I am a master of puns, the noble pun wielder of old, the keeper of the sacred puns, and also a full-time dum-dum, and an educator. So what about you, Jack, Mr. Gleeson?
I want to note that he had about 10 other versions of the Pun Master title that I've made him get rid of. He just kind of he went off on one.
There can only be pun. There can only be one.
God. So I'm my background is in programming, really. That's why I'm building a program. But I've also owned a business in the past, a software company to be more specific. I also conduct technical interviews. Excuse me. So I'm much more computer oriented than creative, but I've been wanting to do a lot of writing. That's been a kind of a side passion essentially of mine for pretty much my whole life. I've loved stories, but being a programmer and somebody who's very as they say, left-brained, the creative process is not something that's really come natural to me.
You need more structure.
Well, I like thinking in structure, but you don't want to just make a story or whatever that's like procedural. Nobody likes. Well, there are some people who like procedural, but
like archetypal stories.
Not even that. It's like the cop show type procedural or something where like it feels very much like
formulaic.
Yeah, that's it. That's exactly it. That's exactly
Friends?
Formulaic. Sure. So I didn't want to make that sort of thing, but like thinking about it only structurally, that's what you're gonna get. So what I started doing was doing a lot of research into how people structure these things, how they come up with worlds and characters and all this different stuff, because like if I can come up with an initial idea, but fleshing it out in a creative way without having any other reason than to just flesh it out.
So you have like the seed of the idea, and now you need some kind of soil to plant it in for it to grow. No, it's a good metaphor for the name of the program. That's
exactly. I mean, that's exactly yes.
I'll pat myself on the back for that, but.
I mean, that's 100%. That's why it's called Soyle. it is based on a pun. Every time you make a pun, it just makes me cringe a little bit. Even though it's a pun that I came up with, or me and Sad Keanu came up with. It still makes me cringe anyway.
We deny the claim that soil is full of shit, but it's called soil, which is manure, but it's not shit.
Soil is not just manure.
It's the shit.
Oh my god. Oh my god. All right. So we're going to talk a bit about this Soyle Studio program that's going to be coming out that I'm currently working on, just to kind of give people an idea of what it's going to be, what they can do with it, that sort of thing.
I'm interested in this program because as a writer, I often get stuck. I'm like, I'll have the idea and different ideas in my head. But the traditional way of writing, you have to be your own kind of structure. You're responsible for your own organization and.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, and that's the main idea behind the program, right? Really, what I wanted to do was allow the user to really just write and brainstorm, and basically let the program kind of take a lot of the detail management out away from you. So you don't have to deal with, okay, I made this change here. Let me check every single inch of my notes to make sure that nothing else is broken in my story, right? Why isn't there something that just kind of does that for you? So that's really the main idea, is taking away a lot of the detail management from writing a story.
Right, using a lot of tags, which is kind of like program speak, but.
Well, yes and no. I mean, definitely there is an actual tagging system within the program that basically kind of lets you rename things and have these tags be automatically updated, so that if you've mentioned the name of a character somewhere and you rename that character, that character will be renamed everywhere, right? But that's not the only thing. There's a lot of details beyond just names of things that you have to keep track of when you're writing a story, and this tool aims to keep track of a lot of that stuff for you.
So the way I kind of imagine this program is that you have a bunch of experts' advice kind of condensed into this one tool that when you're writing and going through the process, it's kind of like having all those experts over your shoulder giving you advice. But
mm-hmm. Yeah. Essentially, the program encourages you towards thinking about your story along the lines of what the experts say, but it doesn't really constrain you to any one way of thinking about it or approaching it, right? It's designed to work for you, not you doing the work for it. Some of the details that we're going to be managing are going to be figuring out and keeping track of what a character knows at any given point in time, what they believe or value, and those things can change, their physicality and mental makeup within any given point in time in the story. One of the things that we learn a lot in schools is kind of this really shallow idea of character development and plot. A lot of people just think of it as, rising at, the intro exposition, rising action. You have 2 or 3 attempts at solving the problem that fail, initially, but the action keeps increasing, and then you reach the climax. You have falling action. You have resolution.
The denouement.
Yeah, I mean exactly. Thank you. Denouement. But there's a lot of writing experts out there that actually expand on that idea tremendously. And so this program kind of helps you understand that on a more fundamental way, if you don't already, right? And what I wanted to do is utilize a lot of concepts from my research to make a tool that will kind of guide you through that without actually forcing you into anything.
So I think one of the maybe fun things we could do in the podcast is we can have a case study. I'll be like, so I have this one story. Let's theoretically, conceptually go through the process. What would I do with it? So if I have the idea of the start of a story, I start up the program. What do I do? So I have an idea of a character. His name is Dax the Spacetronaut. I know I want to have some kind of space adventure. Mm-hmm. And so where do I begin?
Yeah. Well, when you start up the program initially, what it'll do is actually ask you it'll actually ask you where you want to start. Essentially, you have the overall idea for the story? Do you have a certain character in mind? Do you have, if you're a world builder, do you just have a lot of locations and stuff that you want to map out initially, and just kind of plan out how the world works? Or do you want to just start writing, So it'll kind of ask you these things, and then prompt you with various questions about like, okay, so if you're starting with a character, what's their name, etc.
Right. Something.
What are their motivations?
So like prompts are
right. Exactly.
Is like more forms to fill out, or is like prompts open?
So it's a little bit mixture of both, right? There'll be prompts, there'll be forms. Ideally, no form is going to be included in this program that does not actually have a purpose. Ultimately, the story will the program will actually produce some form of output that you can actually use. But yeah, ideally it'll be a lot of prompts initially if you choose a specific starting point. But you can also just choose to say, you know what, I don't really have anything in mind. Why don't you just kind of help me get started? And it'll go, okay. And it'll
okay. Nice.
It'll just give you a blank document or a blank workspace to work with.
Okay.
And you'll kind of see the different options you have available to you, and kind of you can sort of play with them, and just kind of seeing what's available to you may actually help you just kind of get started on figuring out an idea.
So I have an idea for a character, like dash space or not. Now, what is the character tab gonna look like, or what are the options I'm gonna have, or is this still like too early to really go in detail?
So I don't know if I don't know if we can really dive into like the nitty gritty stuff yet. Okay. But the general idea is it'll ask if you want to start with a character or whatever. You click on that essentially. It'll give you some prompts to kind of fill out details about the character you're exploring, and then it'll essentially arrange the workspace. You can think of it like the way that you can have like different tools and stuff open in Photoshop or or different things like that, right? It'll have different little kind of sub windows, tool windows or whatever, that are all focused on kind of character development stuff. So you'll have different features about the character, the ability to kind of map out their character arc and figure out what the theme around that is, what their moral arc is, and what their psychological arc. Those being two different things that should be related, but don't necessarily have to be. Again, suggestions without actually forcing you into anything. A lot of this different stuff. So it'll present you with a lot of these type of tools that are related to character stuff initially.
Like big ideas, like what is a story? That kind of like semi-philosophical question about like what we think a story is, what it should like.
One of the books that I've read, or at least in the middle of reading, is a book called The Hero with a Thousand Faces.
Oh yeah, pretty popular.
Yeah. And one of the things it talks about is, stories kind of being essentially the the journey from childhood into adulthood, essentially, right? There's a kind of coming of age tradition that a lot of cultures have throughout all of humanity.
Going from the known into the unknown. That's like every story.
Exactly. Well, it's every story because, here's the thing, right? In real life, you don't necessarily do that all the time. You kind of do, metaphorically, but you don't actually go on some like life-changing big thing and then come back.
Yeah, you're just usually going to work and back home.
Right, exactly. And maybe something, is challenging that day and you kind of have to deal with it, and maybe that changes you ever so slightly. But, it's never anything really huge. Well, not never, but very rarely is anything really huge. And essentially stories kind of provide us a way to experience that big transition through the eyes of somebody else, or if it's in second person, through your own eyes, but somebody's telling you what you see. That's a weird perspective.
It's like a simulation of life about some particularly pointed event. That sounds pretty lame when you explain it like that.
The way I think about it really is more like it's actually more. I think about it more of a persuasive essay. The writer, whether they're aware of it or not, has an idea that they think is right, right? And essentially their story is them giving you examples about why they're right to think that way.
So
And
like Neil Gaiman is convinced that he's hilarious, and all of his books are there to convince everybody that he is hilarious.
Exactly.
Terry Pratchett,
if you analyze any of those stories, like they have some sort of moral argument behind them, and essentially the story itself functions as a way of exploring that moral argument. Different characters perform different things along that thematic line, either morally or amorally, right? And there's other characters that either challenge them or behave in some way in response. And so just through these different characters interacting and how they choose to act, you get this idea of that the author is exploring. And only once you reach the end do you actually realize like what the overall message is supposed to be, right? All the scenes leading up to that essentially were just different examples about why something is bad or why something is good. But then the climax essentially is the writer saying either this is good because the character won by doing it this way, or this is bad because the character didn't win by not doing that or by doing it this way, or that's right, essentially right. That's it, them making the story's over, and thus there's no more explanation. The climax is literally by definition the thing where you make that decision.
And it's kind of like, what is the story's morals? It's like if you think of stories and they're like one of their original purposes was to instruct, like what is it, science is about what is, and stories about like what ought to be, in a way.
Oh, ought to be, gotcha.
It's like, because it's supposed to be morally instructive, it's like like we shouldn't be like the evil witch. We should be more like the good prince. And here's their behaviors, and here's how it turned out. So
right. And I mean, a lot of these, and that's why you see a lot of the stories over time change. As society's understanding of morality changes, hopefully from less black and white to more nuanced and gray, which I think we are doing. Right. You see, you see a lot more stories around, essentially sending that message at its core of, here's a bad thing, here's a good thing, or at least traditionally good and bad. But are they really? Is the real right way to be somewhere in the middle? Is it some sort of, is morality a what's the term? I was just watching The Good Place.
Like, is morality fixed and humans are flexible, or is morality itself gray?
Exactly. And really just any idea, because stories aren't just about morality. It's also about like psychology as well, like the character themselves.
That motivations and behaviors.
Right.
And then results. So say I want to be an awesome writer who wants to write stories like Lord of the Rings and Rick and Morty at the same time. How can the program help me? And then what can it not do for me? What is it not going to do that I have to do myself?
Well, it's not going to write the story for you, so that's going to be one thing. You can't type in and say Lord of the Rings plus Rick and Morty, and it just generates something for you. Yeah, it's not going to do that.
That'd be freaking awesome.
But I mean, if you have some sort of idea, literally any idea of how those two things could go together, it can help you brainstorm how to make that into a reality. If you have a character from Rick and Morty that you want to then apply in some way to being in the Lord of the Rings world, or vice versa, again, you could start with the character side of things and explore it that way. If you want to do world building stuff because you're in Lord of the Rings and you're like Tolkien, and I just want to like make up a bunch of languages because these are fun. Oh, hey, look, I have to make a whole freaking universe to support all these languages.
Are you gonna have like a language? What do you call that? A neo language app in it? Cool.
So I will distinctly say I definitely am not going to have any sort of like language building tool in the first version. That is definitely not something I necessarily thought of.
So what about the politically correct auto correct?
Oh, Jesus.
Okay, we don't talk about that.
Oh, Jesus. No, there won't be any of that. Nobody should feel pressured into writing any story that doesn't work for them. If you write a story from your own perspective and all your characters happen to be white males, look, I'm not saying your story has to not be that way. Really, it's just a reflection of you. And maybe you should be more aware of that. And like, if you're writing a story that's only white males, like, you should just maybe analyze yourself about why am I only interested in white males.
We'll make another program for that self-analysis.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Yeah. Great.
The doctor app, the psychologist
but also, if the story fundamentally makes sense for it to only include white males for some reason, because you're somehow, exploring that concept, then you should do that. Then, I mean, like, the idea of, like, white males being the only thing in the story, like, if it's kind of, there's a meta message there, like, then that's what you should do. And you shouldn't feel pressured to not do that because somebody's going to be like, why is there only white males in, like, your fucking story? It's like, because that's the whole goddamn point.
All right.
Look,
so if a racist guy writes a story using your program, it's their fault because they're racist.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. There's definitely
good.
I didn't think about this, but maybe we should put a disclaimer in the program that says we are not responsible for the shitty stories that people write using
some kind
this
of
thing.
Game of Thrones autoerotica given there.
God, please stop.
What makes this program different?
Well, yeah, that was a great segue. Good job. So there's a lot of different programs out there that assist writers. Dramatica is one of them. I'm not going to pronounce this correctly, but I think it's Scrivener. What was it? Celtics and Writer Duet. Even Grammarly would be one that you could consider.
Okay.
One of the things about these other programs, so some of them are much more focused on only for screenwriting, right? Soyle Studio is focused on really any type of program, right? Or any type of story. It doesn't want to force you into any type of story that you're going to write. So that's one way in which it differs. But the biggest thing would be that a lot of these things that do, they take note of the characters in your story and their character arcs, and they take note of the events that happen in your story and the different locations, all this different stuff, right? It asks, and it like asks you all these questions about your character, like where did they go to high school, what's their favorite color, all this different random shit, and it's
they could skip questions too. It's not like you have to.
Yeah, I know, but what does the program do once it has that information?
Right.
Nothing. It's all just there for you to look at. And it's like, why can't I just write all this stuff into a Word document? There's no benefit to putting it into this program, or those programs, excuse me, versus just writing it anywhere else.
Right, something I'm more familiar with, like Google Docs.
Right. And maybe they offer some stuff where, like, you delete something and, all the data associated with it gets deleted. Great. I've lost a bunch of information. Hot diggity.
Right.
It's so, it expects you to essentially be the brains. And I'm not saying that you're not supposed to be the brains when you're writing a story.
Right.
But again, it expects you to be the detail manager. It presents all the details you've put into it so that you can do all the smart stuff with it. And what this program, what Soyle Studio is supposed to do is actually do smart things with the information you give it. There's no feature in this system that is included for the sake of you just entering data for the sake of entering data.
Right.
Every form has been created.
It uses the data.
It uses the data to do something smart with it. It ultimately leads to some sort of feature you're getting out of it, whether it being warning you about a scene not really being needed in your story, character arc never being covered, plot events that just aren't necessary or maybe are inconsistent with the rest of your story, pointing out some very specific types of plot holes, that sort of thing. It does a lot of the smart stuff automatically based on the information that you get.
It can understand your input enough to categorize it and use what it understands in order to guide you to write. That's how it's
Essentially,
different.
yeah.
That's how it's different from
Right.
these other programs.
Right, exactly. And it's not going to force you into any particular way of thinking about your story, which I think I've mentioned before. But it's designed to suggest and guide you towards the things that a lot of the experts in story writing tell you to do, but it's not going to force you into any particular thing.
Right.
It should not. Writing a story as a creative process should not feel like you're filling out a spreadsheet.
So who are some of the inspirations? Who are you drawing inspiration from specifically?
So I think my biggest one would be John Truby. John Truby's Anatomy of Story. I've read Story by Robert McKee. That was kind of my first intro to books around the topic. Although I actually have read Stephen King's On Writing, but see his style of approaching writing a story is so foreign to my way of thinking.
He had like two chapters in there that were interesting. So
it's not that they weren't interesting. I can't think the way he does. He just comes up with stuff and keeps fleshing it out until there's just a story there, and it's like that doesn't make any sense to me. He starts writing it and just keeps writing until the story is done. It's just it's like that doesn't help me in any way. A lot of people don't have
that natural just.
No. A lot of times when people do that, their story is shit. 99% of the time, it's shit.
Yeah.
So.
Who wrote Hero of a Thousand Faces? That's what's that guy? Is that guy's name?
That is Joseph Campbell.
Yeah, Joseph Campbell.
Yeah. But one of the other ones that I've done instead of reading, I've actually been I actually watched a lot of YouTube channels that have to do with writing. The big one being Lessons from the Screenplay. I absolutely adore that channel. Lessons from the Screenplay. It is a phenomenal channel. They do. They talk about movies and TV shows, and they break down those things structurally. That's actually how I found both Story by Robert McKee and John Truby's Anatomy of Story through that channel.
Last of Us storytelling. Ooh, that'd be cool. That's their latest one.
There you go. And video games. He dives into a bunch of different stuff.
Cool.
So another one is kind of a silly one, but is a lot of fun. Is terrible writing advice. It's done basically every video is done in a sarcastic way. So he just kind of goes, "Oh, this is the way you should write it, right?" And he says it sarcastically because he's basically telling you the exact wrong way to write the thing. You should never insert the right way to do something, right? So it's a lot of fun. He has a recurring thing of the love triangle, always giving a love triangle to everybody. Because of course, yeah. So it's great. He uses a really outdated meme. He does the awesome face. Because when he first started his channel, I think it was, the meme of the day, or maybe even then it was outdated, but I don't know. But he just has kept using it because it's just iconic to his channel now.
For every 4 people, there are at least 3 love triangles happening.
There you go. Oh man,
I'll have to chart that out.
Yeah. Another one is Just Right. Cool. They do some deeper analysis of things. There is that's a YouTube channel as well. One that I found through Lessons from the Screenplay, but is no longer creating videos, is Every Frame of Painting, which does some interesting, which does some really interesting analysis of movies. Some of the sillier ones that are a little bit more abrasive, you could say. They're not quite professional. They're just kind of, a guy talking about stuff. That would be Nitpicks, which is a very silly one, and Full Fat Videos. Full Fat Videos is a little silly. They dive into the deep stuff, but are still a little bit silly. So those are some of the resources that I've been using. There are some others that I want to read about. I think Robert McKee has another book called that's just about dialogue, which I'm really interested to get my hands on. Yeah. So there's some other things I still want to do some research on, but a lot of this stuff is where I've taken my inspiration from to kind of take all these ideas and put them into a single program.
Right. And talking with other writers who hopefully.
Well, yeah, exactly. Because that's the thing. That's the thing is like, all this stuff kind of makes sense to me, from a structural perspective. But, if I go and make a program that's just structural, that makes sense to me. It doesn't necessarily make sense to anybody else. So what I do every time I develop a feature is I make sure I talk to other writers who have different approaches to make sure that it actually makes sense to them. And I go, okay, for this specific part of writing a story, how do you approach it? Where do you usually come from? And I try to make sure that the feature covers essentially my structural perspective, but also these other few perspectives that could approach that same kind of feature. And by building it that way, you kind of get these features that all just kind of work together from any direction, and you can just kind of go all over the place without feeling like you're restricted or constrained into any one particular way.
It'd be interesting, like when you release some kind of beta version or whatever, that we have like a group of writers and they use the program, and then we can talk to them about what their process is going on right now and such.
Right.
Suggestions
and all that. Yeah. There's definitely going to be a big feature request thing, and one of the big things about this whole creative suite of stuff, writers, especially struggling writers or artists, they're not exactly known for having deep pockets. Right. One of the things that we're actually going to be doing,
they lose themselves in fantasy too much.
Well, yeah. So one of the things we're going to actually be doing is essentially releasing this for free. There will be essentially a community version that anybody can really see the code for, and suggest features and all this different stuff, and kind of see the process of development. There will be a paid version later on that really only offers non-essential stuff. That's really more for like collaborative and enterprise.
So if you have like a team, or enterprise.
Right, exactly. But a lot of the core features, a lot of the core automated features are going to just be available in the free version, in the community version is what I'm calling it.
And if it'd be awesome to have a platform for people to showcase their work and everything. And
right.
Wouldn't hurt to get some attention for them so that it comes back attention for you. It helps everybody. Mm-hmm. We got a pyramid scheme. All right. Just kidding. I don't know how pyramid schemes work.
Yeah. And the thing is, look, DeviantArt is an interesting website. It has an interesting concept behind it. But it's really not...
I've seen what goes on at DeviantArt.
Exactly. It's really not a professional place. It's a place where, it's artists putting their stuff out and jerking each other off, or usually jerking themselves off in the company of others.
It's like writing.com. Just like nobody really cares about each other's stories. It's like, unless you're really...
It's true, though.
So, yeah.
Well, and so what I'm hoping to do, and this will take some real thought behind crafting this, but what I'm hoping to use the community edition of this for is to actually craft a community around helping people, get editors and beta readers and things like that.
Make a polished product, or if you're looking for something, you can find someone.
Right. And something that is somewhat, professional, but you can still just post, whatever you want. There'll be community guidelines, so certain things will be off limits.
It's like, do people hire each other, or is it they have to agree?
And that's
the
thing.
Figure
I
out
think
themselves?
those are the. I don't know. These are the wrong questions to be asking right now.
right. You just want collaboration going on.
Yeah, I just want collaboration going on. I want a community of people sharing and getting help from each other, and also talking about their stories and the program itself.
Right.
So, well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you. I have been wearing pants this entire time.
Oh, Jesus. I know. I've been looking at it. You guys, it's awful. Well, thanks everybody. Join us next week if I haven't killed Tom. See you later.